Hello friends, welcome back to the next session on operations planning, scheduling and control. Now let's begin with our learning. In this particular session, we'll be able to understand and deal with the concept of handling random priorities, the learning objectives. At the end of this particular session, the learners will be able to understand what do we mean by or how do we identify the handling of random priorities and what are the various activities or tasks that have been undertaken for handling the random priorities. Now let's first understand what do we mean by handling the random priorities. In terms of handling the random priorities, the word scheduling is utmost important. Now, when we schedule a certain activity, those particular scheduling of activities is followed with a series of action. That is, one activity followed with another. Now, such schedule or series of activities, when they are being identified, based on the schedule, we have to utilize a certain amount of resources. Those particular resources may be available within the organization, or the particular resources may be sourced from outside the organization. And once the scheduling of such activity is being undertaken, we have to employ or we have to see that all the equipments, the facilities, the product, the quality of raw material, the quantity of raw material, the availability of human being, the availability of resources, everything is into place. And when those particular activities are being conducted, we have to undergo a certain situation when either at a several point of time, there may be either success or there may be either failure. And hence, when such certain situation arises that a certain system does not operate or function in a very effective way, then that particular concern may be called as an handling the random priority. The handling of random priority may be associated with the short-term perspective or may be related with the long-term perspective. In terms of the long-term perspective, the conditions or the factors related to the plant location, the plant layout, the facility preparedness, and so on may impact the decision of a particular person. And with those particular concerns, the manufacturing unit may get affected. In terms of the scheduling, which is of a short-term nature, so for those particular concern also, the random priorities may affect or may get impacted on a particular organization. And hence, the production or procurement of goods and services from one level to another level gets impacted, and accordingly, the priorities needs to be set about which activity should be conducted when and how the priority needs to be set. So, based on the urgency, based on the need and importance of a certain activity, the priority needs to be set and they should be handled. Now, let's understand what is the operational feasibility of handling the random priority. So, in terms of the effective scheduling that has been implemented, a certain understanding or a certain thought is been given by Brian Finch, which in recently or sort of a certain concern, he has made a certain research and he has observed that the lean manufacturing and just-in-time production capacity has contributed to the growth of feasibility in the organization. So handling of priorities in the organization is essentially important only when these two concepts, that is the lean manufacturing and just-in-time, are into existence. The concept of stock out has come out as a certain person wherein when there is a series of flow of activities in the organization at a several stage, the activities may be on a continuous basis or the activities may be on a frequent basis. Now, when the activities are on a continuous basis, it gets impacted that your material or your inventory gets used up at a several point of time. So for a stock out basis, one has to see that there is no less amount of stock available or there is no zero amount of stock available in the inventory or the stores department, and how the effective or optimum utilization of resources as a part of an organization is being dealt with. So with respect to the inventory level which has been identified, one has to identify and see that whatever demand is been there into the market, based on the demand, the supply of the goods and services is essentially matched, and accordingly the business to customer approach, that is the business to business approach with respect to delivery of goods and services in the specified time period is being undertaken. Now let us understand the concept of loading and priorities with respect to the work order management or handling the random priorities. Assigning job to the work centers and various machines inside the work center. So in this case, what do we mean by loading? Loading means a certain concept wherein we are assigning a certain job, and accordingly, when a certain job is assigned to a certain machine, it has to be observed or it has to be seen that the work center is functioning very effectively, and accordingly, whatever job or task is been assigned to a certain machine or to a certain center, it has been completing the particular job or task in the specified time frame and as and when it is been required. So in this case, there is no difficulty if a work can be completed on only one machine. So depending on the availability of machine or a series of machines or an assembly line, the work order may be completed on a one machine or it may be completed on several or different machines. So for those particular concern, the work order requirement may differ or may incur product to product, company to company, assembly line to assembly line, and so on. The job assignment procedure becomes more difficult if there is a excessive workload. So depending on the excessive workload on a particular machine, the loading of a particular product or a certain commodity either increases or decreases, and hence the prioritization is difficult at this particular stage. And hence, when we are considering the scenario of handling the random priority, one has to identify, that is, what is the load for a particular machine, or what job is or a task is being assigned for a particular product or for an assembly line. And based on the load that has been identified, the prioritization of the machine or a particular product needs to be assessed, and then the decision as to what task is needed to be completed needs to be undertaken. Now, next concept that we have here at this stage is the concept of scheduling. Based on the concept of scheduling that has been set, we plan a certain series of activities. And when those series of activities are being planned, one has to take into consideration that all the series of activities are being completed or they are being closed down within a specified time schedule. So scheduling of activities and assigning a certain amount of time to a certain product is essentially important, and accordingly we have to manage and see that whatever processing is being undertaken at each and every schedule is also being done in an effective way, and there is no idle time that is being available either on a certain machine or on the assembly line or for a certain product. Now, what's the correlation between the sequencing and priorities? In terms of sequencing, where it means or refers to a certain product or a certain process of selecting the sequence of product in which the goods or task is being performed. So sequencing is a particular activity, that is the flow of product or flow of machines or flow of a product from one process to another process. And when we select a certain amount of process, we have to assign a certain amount of task or a certain job for a certain machine. That is the flow of machine or a work outstation, how it is being undertaken. A particular task or a particular job may be conducted at one individual machine, or a certain involvement of machines or assembly line may be required. So sequencing of all those particular activities is essentially required. And when certain sequencing is being planned, we have to prioritize about what sequencing can be undertaken, how many sequencing are being required, and at what stages the time will be completed or it will be utilized. So the issue may grow difficult when the core work center that have been associated with the machine scheduling or a machine sequencing is changing. The waiting time is also essentially need to be identified, because it's always get associated with a certain amount of cost. So if a particular machine remains idle and no task or job is being assigned for those particular concern, then accordingly the sequencing activity needs to be changed, and the priorities for a certain product also differs from the product to product, machine to machine, or assembly line to assembly line. And hence processing might be very essential only when the work center are not being identified in a very effective way. Now let's understand what are the various rules of handling and prioritization. Number one, unpredictable. So here in this case, one has to be very predictable and very confirm about what will be the job that will be undertaken, how those particular activity or task will be undertaken, and what is the referencing point that can be applied. The first come first serve basis. Now in terms of accounting, we have one of the concept called as a last in first out or first in first out. The work order prioritization strategy adopts the strategy of first in, first out, or first come, first serve. So, whichever sequence that has been set, whichever machine comes first, the product or the raw material will be delivered to the first coming first machine. And hence, the job that has been allocated in the work order quantity or a work order sequence will be on the basis of first come, first serve basis. The quickest turnaround time. So the quickest turnaround time is a particular concern wherein what is the time that has been utilized by a certain machine, and how the work order generation can be created and it can be completed within a specified time period. The work process inventory. Now, when we call a certain term as a work process inventory, we have to also see that whatever inventory that is being required or the inventory that is needed to be utilized, all those inventory should be made readily available, and there should be no shortage of inventory which is available at that particular stage. The earliest deadline. So whatever deadline that has been set for completion of a certain product, That particular deadline should be met very effectively, and all the series of activities should be completed within the specified time period. The next or the last importance rule of handling and prioritization is the CR, that is the current ratio that is needed to be identified. So based on the ratio or the output that we have to identify, we have to see what is the formula, what is the date, what is the time, and what is the sequence that has been applied. So in reality, which has been commonly used is to using a formula for handling the work order priority that is needed to be undertaken for conduction of those goods and services. The another rule for handling and prioritization is labor work ratio. The labor work ratio focuses on what is the amount or quantity or quality of labor that has been employed. The labor may be either a skilled labor or an unskilled labor, and what is the amount of work that has been assigned to them. So labor work order ratio, it clearly identifies or declares about what is the amount of manufacturing schedule that has been prepared and whether the task is been completed or whether the task is not been completed. So the least amount of work remains as a part of a concern. The fewest operations are being left out. So that is FOR concept. So FOR concept deals with a certain consideration about which activity or task is being completed and which activity or task is not being completed. For these particular concern, one has to identify about what time was being allocated and whether the job or task is being completed within the specified time period or not. The free time. The free time or the ST time deals with a certain consideration about what is the total setup that is being undertaken for completion of a certain task. The task that we have assigned or a slack that we have assigned or that has been scheduled, these particular tasks needs to be completed in the specified time period, and accordingly the work handling situation needs to be completed as and when the time is being required. Another concept that has been related with the rules of handling and prioritization is the slack time. The slack time is a particular concern which is considered as the split of activity between number of operations. That is the time when a particular activity starts and the time when the activity completes. So scheduling of all those particular activities for a specified time period is needed to be undertaken. The next in line approach, that is the NQ. So NQ or next in line is a particular approach wherein the waiting line or waiting time of each and every product or a certain job or a task needs to be assigned, and accordingly in what specified time duration the time or the task will be completed or not, that needs to be ascertained. And lastly, the simplest setup, that is SLU. The simplest setup also identifies about at what level or time the task or the job will be completed and the entire assembly line process will be completed. So the least amount of time to switch from one machine to another machine or from one assembly line to assembly line in order to complete the entire task of a certain machine also needs to be assigned or needs to be assessed. Now, what is the correlation between the Gantt chart and the handling prioritization? So, certain amount of priorities, prioritization of activities was being identified, and based on the particular concern, the management PIO, that is Mr. Henry Gantt, also gave a certain amount of theory. Those particular theory, which was been developed in the year 1900s, was the inspiration for development of Gantt charts. The Gantt charts provides a certain concern or a series for loading and scheduling of certain amount of materials. And with the basis of certain charts which is of a visual nature, it gives a certain assistance for appropriately referring of activity that is needed to be undertaken in a certain organization. So based on the time that is being provided, a typical horizontal or vertical series of activities are being planned, and accordingly the Gantt chart try to identify the trial and error basis of a certain example. That is based on the scheduling or based on the timetable that has been prepared, how each and every individual activity can be undertaken and whether there is an impact or effect on the layout or not. So based on the Gantt chart that have been prepared, a timetable was needed to be prepared, and accordingly each and every work order quantity needs to be completed at a several stages or a point period. So here we can identify that the managers can use various amount or the types of Gantt chart for the trial and error basis in order to see that the work order requirement planning is being conducted in a very effective way, and accordingly the procurement of material is being undertaken in a very effective manner. This technique used is unimportant as long as the principles are correctly implemented. So unless and until there is no proper implementation of those particular activities, the work order generation or series of activities cannot be conducted in a very effective way. There may be either a forward or backward integration of the scheduling tasks. Those particular tasks may lead to a certain amount of lead time, ideal time, the queuing time, the setup time, and so on. So whatever time that has been consumed by each and every individual machine, or the lead time that has been created, one has to identify about what will be the tentative process of ending a certain job. And based on those particular concern, the work order release activities each needed to be undertaken. This may be either the concept of a point forward method wherein a forward scheduling activity can be implemented or a backward scheduling activity can be implemented. Now let's summarize what we have learned in this particular session. In this particular session, we have understood what is the importance or meaning of handling the random priorities, how various random priorities allocation are being undertaken in the organization, and what are the various cost, inventory, and product factors along with the activities that are being undertaken for the work order prioritization or handling the random priorities. I hope you must have enjoyed the learning. Thank you.